I'd now like to hand over to Erik Driessen, the Managing Director for Northern Europe at Dial Utilities, who's going to share some examples with entrepreneurs and founders of digital innovations. So again, thank you, Nusha and Stephen, and over to you, Erik.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon, morning, evening to all of you. Yeah, and the next 45 minutes we will be having 5 technology examples, because the first sessions referred a lot to technologies and solutions. And today with us we have 5 technologies being presented. And first is from Kimberly Nelson, Chief Operating Officer from True Elements. And good morning, Kim, good to have you. Next to Kim we have Ivan Lalovic, founder and CEO of Gybe. Hi Ivan, good to see you. And third in line is Justin Proctor, business development from Ecopia AI. Hi Justin, good having you. And Nick Thompson, partner from WATR. Good morning, Nick. And last but not least, Brian Moloney, CEO from StormHarvester. Fantastic, big group, 45 minutes, challenging agenda. So in the first few sessions, I heard a few people saying, is there too little data to actually do something and get useful information? Do we need to democratize data, and how does that work, and how can we use publicly available data? So I think there's enough topics to address today. Let us start with Justin. You have prepared a few slides to present your solution to the crowd today. So can I invite you to share your screen, maybe?
Yeah, thank you very much, Erik. I appreciate it. All right. I just wanted to thank Asset Mapping for putting on such an awesome event today. It's a really great feeling being surrounded by such smart and passionate people. I'm excited to kick things off here for the technology showcase with a brief presentation. My name is Justin Proctor, and I'm in the business development wing here at Ecopia. I'm going to do a bit of a background on Ecopia and then talk about a case study we did with the city of Detroit and how they're leveraging our data to calculate their stormwater utility fee. I also wanted to apologize in advance if I have to stop to cough or pause, or so if I have to pause to clear my throat. I'm treating today as a Michael Jordan flu game-esque kind of vibe. So to kick things off, as cities become more efficient and drive to become more innovative, I always like to articulate that geospatial data effectively is the foundation of that innovation. So although this is an animated slide, all the details you are seeing on here are the contextual pieces that we are deriving and providing to our clients. It's really that concept of the digital twin, where we're able to deliver insights in the form that can then be integrated into your existing workflows, processes, and make them more efficient. So a bit of a background on Ecopia. So all things considered, Ecopia is a relatively young company. We're about 10 years old in terms of commercialization. We are a Canadian company based in Toronto. We were founded based off of PhD research at the University of Waterloo. It's one of the country's leading STEM schools. The concept for Ecopia started off with leveraging artificial intelligence and deep learning models to extract features from imagery, and then more specifically building footprints. Although this may seem like a commercialized idea in present day, back then cloud computing didn't really exist. If you ask someone what a GPU was, it was very rare for someone to kind of understand that concept. With the rise in cloud computing, it really enabled Ecopia to scale our technology in the sense of actually building out this AI model that we use today. With that, in 2016, we had our first major win, mapping out all building footprints for the Australian government, quickly followed by us mapping every single building footprint across the US. I like to articulate these points because you can see the different, you can see between the 2 years, it's the same amount of area, the same amount of time, but we went from 16 million footprints to 169 million footprints. So that demonstrates how fast this technology was evolving. That evolution of the technology effectively translated into us recognizing that we could leverage the same methodology that we were using for building footprints, but apply it to other man-made features and natural features as well. With that came the advanced land cover mapping projects. And the focus is now on developing land cover solution, which is used for smart cities, autonomous vehicles, and transportation engineering firms. While doing these large-scale operations, Ecopia was still able to deliver the data in a very efficient manner and maintaining that high quality accuracy. Kind of summing things up here in present day, we are developing the first of its kind US nationwide 2.5D land cover map. So some of the industries that we work with are civil engineers, telecommunications, governments, and insurance firms. And what we were trying to do is create a fit for mapping or a fit for purpose approach. We want to maximize the utility of a data input to reach that output that is required. We operate on two functions. We either use our partners' imagery sets, or we can use your imagery sets that you guys might already have. But at the end of the day is creating that HD vector map. So there's an old saying, cheap, fast, and good, pick two. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with manual digitization, as it's something you've probably done at some point in your career or hired some summer interns to do this for you. When it comes to manual digitization, there's a high level of accuracy, generally speaking. The problems begin when you start dealing with large areas and extracting more features. You start running into interpretation issues as well as scalability issues. It's also very expensive over long periods of times. Then the kind of the flip side of this coin is the automated softwares. Ecognition is an example of that. It's very difficult to use. You know, they say it takes a PhD to operate this program. It is a rules-based extraction, so you are able to process large areas at a low cost. However, you are unable to update the data quickly. So where does Ecopia enter the mix? Ecopia is creating data sets that are guaranteed to be over 95% accurate. And when I say 95% accurate, our data produced is going to be higher quality than what you would have produced through a heads-up digitization approach. The data is always normalized as it is a rules-based approach, so you're going to be getting that consistent data all the time. We will deliver the data to you in a very fast period of time. We like to say 4 to 6 weeks from project start date. And you know, municipalities struggle with updated, consistent data, and this is something we really pride ourselves on and bring that to the table. So the 3 points, if you want to take away anything from what I just kind of quickly talked about there, the accuracy, the scalability, and the currency of our data sets, you know, those are the 3 big things I really want you guys to remember. So moving into the fun stuff. For the city of Detroit, we've been working with them since 2019, and we are currently in the process of renewing their contract for another 3 years. And they are doing a sole source for this. In terms of the primary benefits for them, it was the consistency in the updating of the data year over year. For them, they have a good amount of money. They're quite a large city, so it wasn't necessarily the cost savings. Yes, there were significant cost savings, but that was not a material piece of the decision-making process. The original project was put onto a public tender, and there was a full evaluation process. And the primary thing for them was literally just being able to consistently update data sets year over year. You know, and that's what we were really able to bring to the table. The accuracy of our delineations and the consistency of our data. The project was so successful that it has expanded from the water and sewer department to now include the whole city. So they're now getting, I think it's 25 natural layers as well. So some of the primary takeaways from this case study that are pretty cool, in my opinion, at least, are the average delta in terms of change of impervious on a year-over-year basis for Detroit was around 2%. And in terms of their billing and drainage fee, that translates into a delta of about $5.6 million per year. It's quite a large number. And another issue that they faced prior to integrating our data and the public-facing piece that we can also supply was with people complaining about how their fee was calculated. So what we did was set up an online version of this data so the constituents can go on and look at their parcel of land and see how the fee is calculated. And you know, they said this alleviated 85% of constituent complaints. So this is just kind of an example of the aerial imagery that they provided to us. This is just standard aerial imagery. And then we would run it through the AI algorithm. And this is eventually what we would provide back to you after that 4 to 6 week time period. As you can see here, there are 25 different layers. You can get 10, you can get however many you want. And then you're also able to turn these features off. So you can only have, if you just wanted to see bare land, you could just have bare land, so on and so forth. And with that, thank you everyone. And I'm going to pass it back to Erik.
Thanks, Justin. That was very interesting. And just looking at the solution that you are or have been developing and applying across the states and maybe globally, how does the phenomenon of urban sprawl in the US, how does that affect or have impact on heat maps and maybe more broadly climate change in general?
Yeah. So, increase in urban sprawl equals, more impervious surfaces. Emissions from heat sources together with heat accumulated and re-radiated back into the environment lead to what is known as the urban heat island effect. Climate change and heat islands interact in important ways. And in many areas across the United States, steadily increasing warming trends are intensifying already higher temperatures in these heat island areas. This continued warming is expected to worsen heat islands in the near future. As the urban population densities increases, that natural land decreases, heat islands will strengthen. Most affected areas across the US will have had vegetation removed in place of impervious surface, such as asphalt and new buildings, but other factors can also include reduced permeable surfaces, tall buildings and narrow streets, decrease in surface waters, and concentration of heat generating activities in urban areas, vehicles, factories, homes, those kind of things. So on the Ecopia side of things, at a federal level, we are doing work with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, helping them support urban heat map calculations and climate change efforts. So with that increase in the impervious surface, there is more of a runoff into the natural bodies of water, which in turn also increases the amount of pollutants in our waterways. So 1,800 municipalities across the US right now currently have a stormwater utility fee to help combat this runoff. Stormwater utility fees, or SUFs, are an alternative dedicated revenue source to fund stormwater management. The lack of funding has been one of the primary challenges to implementing effective stormwater programs, and the SUFs really help with that. We are working with municipalities across the US, helping them accurately calculate these SUFs. And for an example, you can see Detroit. And for more information on the Detroit case study, you can visit our website. Thank you, Erik. Back to you.
Thanks, Justin. The whole session today is, of course, about healthy watersheds and what digital solutions what the role of digital solutions can be. Brian from StormHarvester. So how do you guys use data to actually make impact on the health of watersheds, and maybe you can give some examples of what you have been doing in the UK or across Europe?
Yeah, absolutely, Erik. Thank you. Such a great question. So we work primarily with water and wastewater companies and also municipalities. And all of our work will be focused on really the outcome we're trying to achieve will be to improve the overall watershed performance. So how we do this, it's really about getting all the right data sources together. So we've got a suite of products that work right across the water cycle, and all of them doing slightly different things, but the outcome being to try and achieve that improved water cycle performance and improve the environmental performance across the water cycle. So let me give you some examples of what we're doing here. So we've got a number of municipalities in the Netherlands that we're working with, where we're looking at their existing water tanks that they have, the municipality themselves. So they'll have stormwater tanks aimed at preventing flooding, catching water. So we link the water tanks to a weather forecast platform. We can then predict what's going to enter the tank based on some analytics around catchment areas, rainfall profiles. And then we can actually actively control the tank so that it can improve its performance. And in doing that, what you can do in certain instances is you can provide water to recycle back into the existing network or to use as non-potable sources. So what we've been doing actually in those examples is if the street cleaners are looking to pick a water source, they'll come to the storm tanks first, whereas previously all that water just ended up in the sewer system and had to be treated at the treatment works. And now that's not required because that water can be recycled back through the network and back through parts of the network so that it can actually be used again. Also using it for irrigation purposes, particularly places like the Netherlands, very water stressed area. They have regular hose ban periods. So they have a source of water to keep the key infrastructure running, like jetting pipes if you're getting sewer issues, like cleaning the streets, like irrigating public parks so that all your flowers don't die for 2 or 3 months in the summer and you've got to go and replant them. So there's a whole knock-on benefit. So really working very closely with these municipalities to improve their overall water performance, but doing it by linking their existing infrastructure to data platforms, and one of the key ones being weather forecast platforms, short-term forecasts, medium-term forecasts, and long-term forecasts, where we can predict what's going to happen in the infrastructure. And then once you know what's going to happen, you can take preemptive action to optimize the overall network performance. So that's some examples in the Netherlands. We've got quite a lot going on also with the UK utilities. The UK is the utility environment in the UK is there's effectively 12 utilities that cover the whole country. We're working very closely with 7 of them at this point across their full networks, where we're taking all of the data from within their wastewater networks. We're running analytics on it, pulling in again weather forecast data, pulling in data sources from other places like groundwater levels, like tidal patterns, like river levels, and then building machine learning models to predict the performance of the network. So similar to a digital twin, but actually doing it with the actual data from within the network, and then using that to predict what the performance should be in the network to optimize wastewater treatment performance. And also a key one for us has been to be able to identify when there's an anomaly running in the network. For example, if you've got a blockage forming in a pipe, we can tell that very early on, we can get a remedy, we can get the pipe unblocked, and therefore we avoid pollution events, which are obviously causing a lot of damage and cause a lot of issues. Similarly with pump failures, not very good to have a pump failing in a wastewater network where it's a critical piece of infrastructure. You're gonna have a situation to clean up. You're gonna have some pollution in that situation. So it's just using the right sources of data along with the right domain experts, machine learning to improve overall watershed performance.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for the examples from the Netherlands, very close by for me. And that all sounds very interesting and promising, but I'm sure you also run into barriers of adopting your solution and working with your utilities maybe in the first place. Can you tell me a little bit about what barriers do you run into?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Erik. I mean, I think all the technology companies on here today will probably have some of the same issues and face some of the same challenges. I think, first of all, the utilities or the municipalities, first of all, they have to understand that there is a problem or there is an issue that needs to be solved, that the status quo won't be acceptable going forward, that we must do something now at this point to try and optimize our performance and improve our performance to actually remedy some of the pollution issues and some of the climate change issues climate change is throwing up to us. So I think that's a really big one. Once you have that in place, I think it's really important that if you're running a solution that's based on data, that you have a good source of data, that the water company or the municipality understand that installing sensors or installing in monitoring equipment, it will need to be installed properly, it'll need to be maintained, and the results that you get will only be as good as the data that you input into the system. And I think the third one would be quantifying the benefits in a way that the utility or the municipality can understand and they hit the right metrics for them. So if the municipality or the utility, if they're driven by the ESG metrics, if they're driven by commercial metrics around, profitability, then that you can actually show benefit in the areas that are important to these utilities once you get in there and get the ability to work with them in the first place. So, I mean, maybe some of the challenges. There is plenty of challenges, Erik, I can guarantee you that. It is not an easy road building new technology and particularly in the water industry, but probably 3 of the main challenges there.
Great, thanks, Brian. And I think all of you, and I think the past hour and a bit has been about data and data availability. Maybe over to you, Kimberly. What is your view on the availability? Is there enough data? I heard some people saying there's too little data to do something with, like the example in Turkey. What is your view on the disclosure of climate data? Should it be all open? And I'm keen to hear your opinion about the data availability and what we can do with that.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here today. And the great thing about having the session going last is that we really get to wrap up some of the topics that we heard earlier and try to pull some themes together. So my background actually was involved several years in the federal government. So if we go back to about the early 2000s, there was a major initiative by the federal government for releasing data and making federal government data, for instance, openly available. That has had a tremendous impact in terms of innovation, and many of the companies that are here today are using that federally available data. The problem is with a lot of that data is it is very difficult sometimes to understand and access and normalize. So one of the things our company is doing is actually using artificial intelligence to take those very complex data sets that are very different, disparate data sets, and normalizing those to make that data much more accessible and understanding to people. But the other issue is that we're really in need of real-time data. We're a society that's looking for what happened today. And much of the federal government data is based on reporting. It might be monthly reporting, it might be quarterly reporting, maybe even annual reporting. So if we really want to make a difference, we really need data that's much more current and much more timely. But the nice part about technology is such that the availability, when we're talking about water, the availability of sensors and the fact that so many new sensors are available that are smaller and cheaper will in fact result in a lot more data becoming available. The question is going to be, will companies and will others release that data? And what format will that data be in? So can we get to the point that where we have some standards around water quality data? You're starting to see that emerge. Organizations like the Internet of Water out of Duke and the Lincoln Institute are really driving those kinds of standards. And I think they'll be important for all of us.
Right. So do you see a trend in that direction, that data gets more and more openly available and people are more willing to share, especially when it addresses an important thing like climate change?
I do, and if people aren't doing it voluntarily, then the government will make them do it. Some of you may have heard of the fact that the Securities and Exchange Commission back in March came out with a new proposal for standardizing climate risk disclosure. So that really addresses two issues. And basically, so how much do companies contribute to climate change? And then what is climate change doing to the company in terms of their impact? So one of the reasons for the Securities and Exchange Commission proposed rules is to do exactly, Erik, what you suggested, is to standardize the reporting for climate risk disclosure. If you sort of go back, and I was a history major in college, right? The Securities and Exchange Commission was created by FDR right after the Great Depression to ensure that companies were standardizing and making information available to investors. It's okay for investors to accept risk, but they need good information to make those investment decisions. And that's exactly what the SEC is proposing to do. There are companies out there today that are really leaning in and want to disclose climate risk disclosure. They want to make available what's happening in a watershed, for instance, and what that risk is to their operations. But there's so many different formats out there. It's impossible for investors to really understand that risk. I'll just point to like two very important things under that climate disclosure risk proposed rule. There's a focus on climate-related risks, and there's a focus on physical risks. Both of those there's a lot of other issues in there, but to keep it related to what we're talking about with healthy watersheds, Nusha, who was on the panel before us, talked about the extreme weather events that we're starting to see today. That's actually addressed very specifically in that SEC rule in terms of acute risks that come from natural disasters, hurricanes, flooding, and the like. So we really have to understand that, and what does that mean to companies today? And then the other is the sort of more chronic risks. They're gradual risks from long-term temperature changes, water level changes. That has a significant impact on things like supply chain, right? So if you're talking about a healthy watershed, companies today need to understand whether there's going to be a availability of clean water supply, and does that create a material risk for a company? So as the SEC moves forward on a rule like that, that will really result in standardizing. Our company is able to help companies do that. So if you think about things like an acute risk, one of the things we can do is really help document what does that mean. Take, for instance, as Nisha was saying, an extreme weather event. A particular facility that a company may have that was built in 1975 was probably built to standards that weather standards that were very different today. You know, there's this saying out there that, you know, today's infrastructure was built for yesterday's climate. We really need infrastructure that's being built today for the future climate that we know that we forecast will happen or predict will happen. With the billions of dollars that are going to be spent on the infrastructure bill, we can, for instance, use our predictive capabilities, our forecasting capabilities, to look at a facility in a hyper-local way and understand what's the weather pattern look like in terms of precipitation patterns, intensities, frequencies, and understand whether that particular facility can withstand that weather, projected weather, between now and 2050, for instance. So when you look at healthy watersheds, that, you know, keep that in mind, that there are those kinds of risks, and companies need to look at that. We heard that a little bit from our presenters in the first panel. Basically, what impact are they having on their watershed? But just as importantly, what's happening in that watershed, and what does it mean to their own operations, both physically and operationally?
Thanks, Kimberly.
And then let me say this, I would love to volunteer for any project that World Wildlife Fund, ABM Dev, and PepsiCo would like to take on. I'd love to be part of that challenge, for True Elements to be part of that challenge and help address those issues.
Great, that's a note that we'll take note of that. We will include you as well, Kimberly. Thanks for that. I love the idea of making data available and standardize that, because we will, I think all of us around the table here will benefit from that. Little step two, the health of a watershed. That's of course the availability, the quantitative availability of water, but also the quality of watersheds. So a little step in to you, Ivan. Could you just introduce what Gybe is doing, and what the solution is, and what is the technology, and what do you think are the biggest challenges that lay in front of us? Is that technology or perhaps something else?
Yeah, thanks, Erik. It's really a pleasure to be here. So Jibe is a technology company that's offering a software as a service subscription to information products that we generate based on publicly available satellite information, as well as sensors that we have developed that are proprietary. Essentially what we do is we measure color of water, and from that color measurement, we deduce what is the soup or what are the constituents there beside the H2O molecule. And we do that using physics and machine learning and other techniques. So really an integrated solution for watershed scale measurement of water quality. So that's really our focus. And what we do extremely well is focus on the specific user needs. I mean, currently the way that information about watersheds is collected, and I think this was brought up earlier, it's discontinuous, so it's not continuous. It's very manual, and really starts with the first samples that are being taken across the watershed. It really can't be scaled, so you're really limited by the organization who's doing the monitoring. They can only deploy so many people, so many times. within the watershed, and sometimes the funding dries up, sometimes the project ends, and you're left with huge gaps in the data sets. And so really, what we're trying to address are these data gaps in time and space, because we have access to the historical context of satellite imagery that's been collected since Earth observation began. And the other thing that I want to bring up, I think Kimberly was talking about real-time data and the value of real-time data. One of the things that is really critical is not just to provide the current pulse of what's going on potentially ubiquitously across the watershed, but to put that into historical perspective. So what is the normal seasonal variability? What is the normal long-term variability and trend, to really assess the baseline and the baseline trend and put that into context? Because there's really two key pieces that the data that you collect enables. One is generating insights. So like what is really happening contextually, and then it allows you to communicate those insights to others. So that, just kind of touching back on themes, that's really what the technologies that we're deploying and a lot of other companies are deploying are enabling, is generating those insights at a large scale with lots of granularity. And in the end, it's not really that, you mentioned challenges. What are the challenges to adoption? It's really not the challenges of applying the right technologies. We have a plethora of technologies to assess and get different answers. It's really how do you facilitate the end users handling of that information and integrating into their way of working. So whether it's changing how they work, whether it's changing how their partners work, changing how they communicate, that's really the biggest kind of set of challenges in terms of technology adoption. It's the transformation of workflows.
So I'm referring to those challenges, and in your opinion, what do you think that the organizational lift or change, what is needed to achieve that transition, that sort of more openness to adoption of the technology?
Yeah, so I think the main parts are really de-risking or making it a very low barrier to entry for the teams that are doing current work to try and evaluate the pros and cons of adopting technology. And so it needs to really work seamlessly. It needs to take very minimal time or effort on the organization's part to access the benefits and really get comfortable. I think data quality was brought up earlier. It's absolutely critical. Remote sensing is, in my opinion, suffered kind of a black eye from over-promising and under-delivering in that regard. So the data needs to be of very high quality and curated to be actionable, because the last thing you want to do is provide data that doesn't inform and doesn't provide insights or provides mixed messages. So those are some of the key elements, is making the information actionable, making it really all about the user's workflow and how they operate, and really solving specific challenges. So what we do is provide proactive information in and around reservoirs, lakes, and rivers for drinking water municipals, for NGOs that are doing conservation, to understand how are the impacts or the objectives of those projects to either protect water or manage the inputs. How effective are those investments?
Yeah, great, Ivan. Thank you very much. And with basically everything we discussed today, there's no data without sensors. And Nick, I think that's where you're coming from WATR. You have developed a sensor, a suite of sensors. Can you explain us how your solution, how your technology is addressing the topic of today of healthy watersheds, and maybe reflect on some of the things that your colleagues have said just now?
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. Yeah, sure. I guess we when we looked at developing the products 5 years ago now, I think we realized when we were starting to look into the water industry in the UK that there was a lot of traditional monitoring systems that were expensive. They were only you were very limited at where you could install them, just because of the infrastructure that was needed, and the fact that they're also very expensive. So we sort of went about designing, I guess, a low cost, easy to install telemetry system, which basically enabled us to you know, we almost wanted to take the Apple approach. If Apple designed a water quality monitor, how would they do it really? And we sort of took that on board, but we also wanted to develop it so not only could it use our preferred suite of sensors for doing certain use cases, it was flexible enough to take on any sensors in the marketplace really. So yeah, I think, you know, the problem we were aiming to solve was this whole point that actually when we've spoken, and the water companies, the utility companies we're working with in the UK and Australia, they really sort of see this need for multiple measuring points, so that you are able to create a smart network within a river catchment or watershed, in order that you're able to sort of find out exactly where these problems are coming from, because it is that classic thing of, you know, you can't manage what you don't measure. So, you know, knowing where those problems are coming from. So having a, you know, a large expensive kiosk at the end of the catchment doesn't actually tell you where that problem is coming from, but actually being able to monitor flow, turbidity, you can start to understand where there is sort of spillage from agriculture, where that point's coming from. And then you can start to narrow that down. So you can either start to knowing where those issues are, you can start to make, you know, lab sampling more targeted, rather than just doing the equivalent of one every month or one every 3 weeks or something like that, where it's highly probable that you won't even capture that incident at that point in time. And also being able to provide, you know, live alerts and notifications. So at any point in time, you know where those problems are coming from. And I think importantly, then being able to share that data freely through, so we have an API that we've built into our system. So we work with a number of AI companies, we work with people like CGI and Siemens. So we can take the data, we can take the information from our data platform, but more often than not, our clients want the flexibility to actually be able to utilize that data where they need to make it more accessible within their organization. Or, you know, in our ideal world, when we were developing the product, it was actually to make the data freely available to the general public as well. And that is certainly as well one of the use cases we have, is actually providing up-to-date, valuable bathing water information to people who want to know if there has been an incident, actually, is it safe for them to go in the water or is it not? And again, we're working with a number of utility companies who are now really working to be a lot more transparent with their data around these problems that are all related to water quality. So I guess, yeah, I guess our approach to this is very much around, yeah, solving this mass networking of censoring, so that you can build up this knowledge, you can start to manage and understand where the problems are coming from, and then you can start to look at what you prioritize and where you do, you know, where you focus most attention to solve these problems. So probably a good example is we're working on a watershed or catchment in the UK in Devon, and they have a significant problem where there is an ongoing pollution incident at a beach, a bathing beach, where obviously there's tourism, all sorts of things like that. And at the moment, they don't really know where the problem's coming from. So we've installed not only water sensors, so we've got 52 different water sensors all within the catchment at different points. So we're live monitoring, that's all being fed into the Siemens system. And then we're also installing things like soil monitors as well, which can be integrated with our system as well. So we're building up this big picture of exactly where and what is going on in that catchment, so everyone is informed and can know how to deal with incident and then isolate the problem and then address where that's coming from, and also educate you know, potential farmers, agricultural sources in order to manage their sort of farming methods.
Thanks, Nick. I love that example of making the data, the debating water, making data, quality data, making that publicly available. I think that ideal world that you are describing there. I hope we can make quick steps to that, or maybe by default making your data publicly available. That will be a fantastic step. We have a question from Angela from the previous panel, and she was asking, can we standardize the indicators needed to measure watershed health and then work together to have that information available to all stakeholders in the basin? Does any of you have a view on that?
I can try just very quickly. So, the air pollution has a very good analog, which is the air quality index. There are a number of frameworks that can be used to derive a water quality index. That being said, there are very specific local sensitivities for watersheds. In some cases, very high turbidity or sediment transport is very important, especially for coastal resilience perspective. In other cases, that's an indicator of conditions that aren't very good. So blocking, for example, water flow with dams prevents some of that sediment flow. So really, again, depends on kind of what are the attributes, what part of the ecosystem does it affect, and it's a balance. So it's not a super simple answer as come up with a water quality index that works, but it needs to take both the cultural significance, the ecological significance, the socioeconomic significance of the value of water, which is typically very challenging.
Kimberly, anything to add?
I would just say, I do think you can. The indicators, I agree with everything that was just said, but that you could agree to a certain minimum set of indicators, and then maybe some optional ones. But at the very least, you could agree to some standards so that the information, if it is collected in such a way, like an appropriate XML schema or something, so that it facilitates the sharing of information.
Fantastic. See, there's another question from, thank you, David. That's addressing David. There's probably another chat. We are actually close to the end of this session of our 45 minutes. We have a few minutes left. Is there the topic of today, healthy watersheds, and we spoke about making data available, democratizing data, standardizing data, of course, applying sensors throughout the watersheds. Is there any call to action? Will did it in the first session as well? Does any of you want to reach out to the attendees today, or suggest any other calls to actions to the whole sector, basically?
If I could just follow up, I do think the call to action in the first session was really powerful, in the sense that if you listen to everybody who was speaking here today, these are all companies that are developing really innovative technologies. And somebody touched on this in the beginning, we often live in a world where everybody's looking for perfection, right? And everybody wants the total, complete solution. That's not likely to happen in any one of these situations where any one of these companies is a startup. But the way to get there is to do what Dr. Ortagaro might have recommended too, was to say, let's work together. Let's pick a project, let's pick a pilot where maybe several of us can work together, and whether it's about standards or just addressing an issue and using some real applied technology, because that's how we'll learn. And some of the bigger companies out there, the ones that are leaning in on their ESG goals, for instance, and leaning in on their environmental plans, are the ones that can help these smaller companies really mature their technology. And that's what it's going to take, whether it's government, and some of these, many of my colleagues here today on this call are working with governments. But what I've seen in the last 10 years, governments have really started innovating where they're taking a risk on startups, and they've put processes and programs in place that gives startups a chance so they can and really innovate and see new technologies. And I think that's what we need. And so if we're going to solve some of these big problems, it's going to take coming together and giving some of these innovative technologies the opportunity to be applied and to learn and grow and mature.
Thanks, Kim. Brian, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe if I could just add to that. I mean, I think coming at it from the perspective of, you know, a smaller company, a startup company, the potential clients and the organizations that have the problems that need solved, and I'm talking here about municipalities, water companies, water utilities, and large industrial, large larger companies. I think there is an onus on them to be open about their problems and to really invite in companies to help them solve their problems together. And like Kimberly said, maybe multiple companies can come together to solve some of these problems. And got some good examples of this in the UK. The water companies in the UK are heavily regulated. So they're really forced through regulation into really trialing and running a lot of innovation. And we did a project in 2019 with Wessex Water. They're a big water utility in the UK, where they just published a challenge on their website and invited companies that would like to have a go at it, publish some data, publish a challenge, give a description of the problem, and just invited companies in to try and help them together solve the problem. And that's ultimately led to us developing a blockage prediction product that we subsequently rolled out over half the population of the UK. So I think really the onus is on the bigger companies to be open, and then that puts the ball in our court then to really go and service them and provide the solutions to them.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. I also see I think it's not really a question, but more an offer. Barbara Ryan from the World Geospatial Industry Council. She's very happy to contribute in this collaboration, in the things that you are suggesting here now, in helping to bring the private sector capabilities to these issues. And we are seeing increased public-private partnerships emerge. These should be encouraged to ensure we are using all the tools in the toolbox for these very important environmental issues. Thank you very much, Barbara. Any last things to share from your side, from the panel here? Then I would like to thank you. Thanks a lot for your introductions, to your contributions to this conversation here. I think there's so many, and these are just 5 excellent technologies that are out there on the global market. And I really appreciate your suggestion, Kim, to work together, because I think there's gold over here, and it should be applied by all stakeholders here.